So welcome back to Ask Lattice. In these episodes, we're going to answer all of those questions that you've given to us on the discussion group, Instagram, and on the YouTube page.
Okay, question 1 this week is from Craig. He has asked how to plan for a goal a couple of years out from now, potentially also a couple of grades away. So those big goals which aren't that close yet.
So firstly, well done on committing to the long-term process. That's something we love to see, and it means that you're really committed to your improvement as a whole climber.
And that kind of process of pulling away from something which seems like quite a big distance and working out how does that process look and how do we stay in that process for a good period of time is definitely a tricky one. And it's something that I've done a lot over the years with my own training and the projects that I've had on board. And I'd say the first thing that I've become very good at is I'm very process orientated and I have lots and lots of process goals. So those are little things which all the way through the year, if you ask Ollie what I'm talking about, it's not generally about the big goal that I have in 2 years' time. It's about my little parts, my little steps all the way along the way, which I know are little stepping stones towards that big goal. And that keeps me in the process.
So a good example of that is if you have a specific route in mind that is, say, 3 grades harder than what you're currently trying to do, what you wouldn't be aiming to do is just get on that route over and over again, aiming to do a few more moves on that route. The process goals is maybe understanding that the route you would like to do requires a high level of finger strength, and the process would be increasing that finger strength a little bit more, and keep making small improvements over time. And it means you're buying into that process of getting a little bit stronger and focusing on the physical requirements that you need to accomplish your end goal.
Yeah, it's super important. And another part which really factors into this, which is kind of like a psychological element, is that when we aim towards a goal and we achieve it in quite a short time, we get this reward process. It's put a load of hard work in and then you get something nice at the end. And that feels nice, but when you're on a really long pathway towards something, you don't get any reward. And it's really easy to get down about things and feel like you're not getting anywhere. So that's why building in those little rewards all the way along the way to remind you and say, well done, you're making steps towards this big goal, keeps you in that process, keeps you motivated, because you've got to be. You're in it for 2-3 years. You can't be inconsistent with this stuff.
So to quickly summarize that, understand where you need to be, understand where you are now, and then create process goals to accomplish that change. Okay, so another question we're looking at is from Florian, and this is another one from our discussion group, is what are the advantages of one arm dead hanging against 2 arm dead hanging? And this is talking about using a fingerboard, usually to get stronger fingers doing maximal hangs.
Okay, this is a big topic and there is a lot to go in with this, and it's a question which comes up loads, doesn't it?
Yeah, as a bunch of coaches, we've played around with this a lot. We've tried out different handholds, different grip positions, and also just hanging on 1 and 2 arms in different hanging positions as well. The key factor is, what are you trying to accomplish by doing this dead hanging training session? Is it maximal strength? And therefore, are you creating the correct stimulus to achieve that?
Yeah, it's basically that you can get quite distracted by the method. Is 2 arm better than 1 arm? Is 1 arm better than 2 arm? And it's really focusing on what adaptation are you trying to create? Because fundamentally, both you and I see single arm hangs as very effective at gaining strength, and so are 2 arms. They're both really good, but they have slight nuances and differences between them. And if we're not achieving that overload and that stimulation of the muscle to bring about physiological change, we're not going to be going anywhere.
So rule number 1 is, if you are training on a regular basis using one of those protocols and you're seeing gains, continue to use that protocol as long as it's safe. So don't stop something that's already achieving or working towards your goal of getting stronger. And another guideline that we'd probably say as well is, once you get used to a certain protocol and you stop seeing those gains, then it's time to mix it up.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to be balanced across the two. And we've come across a lot of climbers over the years who can have some incredible single arm scores and then really awful two arm scores, and vice versa. And the best climbers are actually the ones which are quite balanced across both of those. So have a look at it, do some profiling and work out which one is your strength and which one is your weakness, and really try and work on balancing that out.
I would say, as a further guideline to that, if you're struggling to do one arm hangs with more than 20% of body weight on a pulley or support, then it's probably too intense for you to be doing on one hand. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're hanging on two arms and you're using loads and loads of weight and it's starting to feel uncomfortable on your hips or back, then it might be time to move on to one arm hangs, because it's more comfortable and it's going to keep you safer for longer.
Yeah, that's great. So another question that we have here is, how do you manage training with injured fingers?
And this is from Barbara on the discussion group again.
So this question is another one that comes up quite a lot. We get quite a few emails and messages from clients asking about how to deal with injured fingers, and let's be honest, it's something that will occur in every climber's life, and we've got to learn to deal with it and how we balance this with the training that we're going to be doing every week. And we've probably got quite similar approaches with this, but it'll be really interesting to see how we look at this.
So we've both experienced quite a few finger injuries over the years, and that's through doing different protocols, just random accidents. And unfortunately, it just occurs in climbing because we're using holds that aren't really outside, that aren't really designed for us to be hanging onto. So first of all, you need to address how severe the finger injury is. If it's causing pain non-stop, then that's your body telling you to stop doing what you're doing. So if you hurt yourself at the crag, or when you're climbing indoors or training, and you try to carry on and it's painful, then it's probably not a good idea. The acute phase, generally just stop what you're doing and call it a day. Did you say the same?
Yeah, exactly the same. Is that when you've got some kind of acute injury, you really need to take some time to reflect on how serious is it, go and see a professional, and let that time pass over a few days to really understand what's going on. We have so many people that completely panic that half an hour after they've had some kind of tweak or injury, they're straight away thinking that it's the end of the world. And often they've only given themselves half an hour to work out what's going on. Take some time out from the activity and actually work out, how inflamed is that thing? How serious is it? Give yourself some time before you then take the next steps.
So the next step that we often find quite useful to do is, after a couple of days off, is to start doing some mobilization work on your fingers. So that's doing stuff like finger glides and just moving your hands around a big range of movement. And then you can start adding in some task work. So very, very easy climbing on jugs and grip positions that don't feel uncomfortable at all. By doing that mileage, it gets more blood flow to the area and it stops scar tissue developing, depending on the injury that you've got. It'll also tell you how severe the injury is and whether you need to go and seek professional advice or need to have it just a bit more time off.
Yeah, and with the kind of rehab and the method of approaching injury and getting back into that training part of your lifestyle, is really it's only appropriate to step up to the next stage in terms of the intensity that you're pushing your finger through once you get out of that pain element. So don't just keep pushing if it's painful consistently. You've got to allow that healing, that recovery to occur. And we see too many people push too hard, too soon. It takes time, and you've got to work with the direction. So I spend a lot of time reassuring people that the most important thing is actually the direction of the injury, not the rate at which the injury is changing or what's occurring. Make sure that it's traveling in the right direction, i.e. it's getting better, albeit sometimes quite slowly.
Yeah, and with that patience comes just being progressive with the loading that you give it. So most soft tissue injuries respond really well if, as you start to bring in climbing again more and more and more, just make the intensity very, very slow and gradual and progressive, and don't rush into something too big. On the other hand, if you have a niggle, then make sure that you address it in the same way you have an injury. If you just carry on, ignore it, that's usually what happens when you end up having a couple of months off because you've made it too bad.
One particular group to really have a slightly different approach with the injuries and finger injuries in particular is junior climbers. And if you see any junior climbers who have a finger injury, normally it's best to get booked in straight away with a doctor and try and investigate whether there's any kind of growth plate fracture, because the repercussions of ignoring this type of injury are really serious and have long-term effects on an athlete's health and hands. So get booked in very early with that. You have to treat that a little bit more seriously than some of the adult injuries.
In summary, managing training with injured fingers is a pretty complicated topic. And if you take the things into account we've just said about how to manage an injury when it occurs, that's going to take big steps into helping you. But beyond that, it's so complicated that you need to take an individual approach and perhaps seek professional advice so that you can understand better what you need to do.
Next question is from Christian, and this is a good one. Advice for making replicas for projects.
Tom's probably a man for this more than I am, but so as a question then, if you are training for Century Crack, how did you manage your replica training for that?
Okay, so this is one of the first kind of bits of replica training that I did in my climbing career, and the approach that I took was that I wanted to make sure that I was really focusing on the climbing movement and the intensity being very, very similar to the project that I wanted to try. So this is a big crack route in the USA, which is a roof crack, and it's an off-width, so you're shoving all of your body into this crack. So I needed my replica to be almost a carbon copy of this project outside, but I needed the intensity to be really similar. And so if I build something which doesn't match up and isn't really similar in movement, then I'm not going to see the same kind of improvements by training on that replica. So it's the movement element and the intensity with it, which is just so key.
And I guess one of the important things is trying to get that information on getting the movement right and the intensity. So either you could go on that problem or that project yourself and understand the movement as best as you can, or I think in your case you got information from Stevie Haston, right?
Yeah, magazines and everything like that, yeah.
So you can always look on media or films or footage to get a little bit more of an idea about what the movement's like. And if you've been on the project yourself, don't just trust your beta unless you've got it completely wired. Have a look what other people have done so that you can try replicas in that way as well. So another good bit of advice for making replicas is to make several of them. So you're not just doing the one movement or the one style in one plane before you go out on your project. Just tweak it a little bit so you get stronger in many ways.
It's especially easy on replica training to really get too in deep with one single form of a replica, especially if you're working on a project for a really long time. So as Ollie said, really try and create a variety of different replicas which more or less mimic what you're trying to do, but you're tweaking things around, because all the best replica builders that I've ever met over the years that have had a lot of success have actually built maybe 5, 10, 15 variants of their project replica, and they change those over time.
So the final question is from Kim, and that is saying, what stage does training become useful? And I guess this is addressing the issue of what grade should I start training? We get asked this quite a lot because we have a lot of people that come to us that are currently climbing at lower grades, and they're asking us for training plans, but they're not sure it's appropriate.
Yeah, it's because I think when you take training, you think of it as being something that's really hardcore and only access to the very highest level athletes, and it's only appropriate for them. But ultimately, training is just about taking a focused approach to the sport that you do and trying to bring about change. So everyone ultimately has strengths and weaknesses, and if we can identify what we need to work on and then implement some kind of form of training, whether it's easy, moderate, hard, then it's going to be effective and it's going to make a change to any climber.
And the biggest adherence to training, or the factor that means that you do stick to it, is enjoyment and motivation. And if you enjoy training, regardless of what level you're at, that's the most important factor. So just because you're not climbing at a higher grade, but you fancy doing some structured work and you enjoy doing conditioning and you enjoy doing structured bouldering, for example, there's absolutely no reason why you can't do it. And because you enjoy it, you're more likely to stick to it, and you'll probably see the gains from that.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally true, that, and it's what really affects a lot of people that we see. And once they start to kind of take that on board and apply that, then they have so much more improvement in their journey forward as a climber.
On the other end of the spectrum, we see so many climbers that are at the top end and they just don't enjoy that structure. Even though they're climbing at a really high standard and they've done loads of climbing from a young age, they don't enjoy having to do a structured and regimented plan. And I think if they tried to do that, it would actually mean their performance dropped because they didn't really want to be going to the wall. So it works in both ways.
So I hope you've enjoyed today's questions. Please do like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. If you have further questions that you'd like to see answered in other episodes, pose them in our Facebook community page, on Instagram, and also on our YouTube channel, and we'll get through to those on subsequent episodes.